Hello, guys, and welcome into the C Team podcast. I am your host, Emmitt Sevores, and I'm without my co-host once again, Dallas Wicklander, but that is okay. We have a heck of a show here for you. But today we are revealing number 27 on our full NFL power rankings, and that's going to be the New York Football Giants. And here to talk with the Giants about me is Paul Dottino. Paul, how are you doing?
Hey, good to talk to you, but I think we should probably be talking in a few weeks because 27 is way too low for this team.
Well, you know what? Let's get into that. But before we get, right into, the Giants of this year, let's talk a little bit about the Giants last year. The Giants did not have, the best season of all time. They went 4-13, only getting a couple of wins off of, the Carolina Panthers, the Vegas Raiders, Philadelphia, the division rival Eagles, as well as their first win against the New Orleans Saints, which Daniel Jones threw for over 400 yards. What would you say, Paul? What would you say went wrong for the Giants last year?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that when you look at that team, first things first, the whole second half of the season was an entire washout because Daniel Jones had gotten hurt and they were forced to put Mike Glennon into the lineup. And, whatever you thought about Mike Glennon's NFL career prior to coming to the Giants, throw it out the window because last year, the moment he took over that team, the offense became non-existent. And look, I don't second guess the team because when they brought him in, remember Colt McCoy was their backup the year before, and he actually had won a game in Seattle when they primarily relied on the running game against the Seahawks. McCoy actually, I believe, won a couple of games last year when he was with the Cardinals as a backup. For whatever reason, they wound up going with Mike Glennon as the backup last year. I know they did reduce their economic commitment because he was cheaper than McCoy. He certainly has a stronger arm than McCoy as a traditional pocket passer. But let's not kid ourselves. From the moment that Mike Glennon took the field, this offense was totally non existent. So, to be frank with you, I throw out the whole second half of the season because I don't think that's at all indicative of what this team was, given that they really didn't play with a quarterback. So that would be my first thought to you. My second thought would be that the offensive line, which had been basically retooled a number of times over recent years, had been retooled again during the summer, and then they wound up playing third and fourth stringers during the course of the season. And I think we all know that when you don't have a solid offensive line, you don't have a chance. So between the line that totally crumbled because their best laid plans got sabotaged by injuries and by retirements, and then they wound up getting their starting quarterback hurt midway through the season, to me, circumstances totally destroyed any hope that they had of being a reasonably competitive team. So I think anybody who looks at the 2022 Giants and tries to base anything off of the 2021 season is making a very serious mistake.
Yeah, and I think when you do look at the team, especially those last what is it 6 weeks that they had Mike Glennon at quarterback for 5, Jake Fromm was their leading passer in the final game at Washington, but they didn't amass or they did not go over with their highest passer on the team, so the starting quarterback. They didn't get over 200 yards once. I think another one of the I think we'll get into talking about Saquon Barkley a little bit later, but you look throughout the entire season, and there was one time that they got very close. They only got above 100 rushing yards with a single. They only had a 100-yard rusher, as I should say, once the entire season, which I think is a bit of a concern about the Giants, especially when you don't have a guy at quarterback. But I think that we'll get into the Daniel Jones a little bit later. But another part last year was the head coach out. So what do you think was the last? Obviously, everyone's going to, point and look at the quarterback sneak on what was it? Was it down in 9? To that as being the final straw. But obviously, there was some sort of build-up to judge.
Well, again, the line had crumbled to such a degree that it was unreasonable to expect them to compete at all. And as things snowballed, and then Jones got hurt, and they were forced to put in Mike Glennon, there was no way that they were going to be able to put a respectable team on the field. Now, at that point, it's incumbent upon the head coach to try to make some type of adjustments, to try to find a way, any way possible, to do something with what he's got, to see if they can somehow out-scheme people or somehow get the most out of nothing to at least be reasonably competitive. But that's not what happened. Once the snowball gained steam going downhill, it basically just the snowball went out of control and the entire team just went in the tank. Um, whether or not you want to blame the fact that they were playing a lot of third string guys, I mean, that's certainly part of it. Do you want to blame a coach who was certainly only in his second NFL season for not being able to come up with a game plan to somehow stop the bleeding? Certainly a part of it has to lie with him. I mean, that's clearly he's not here anymore. So he wound up taking the brunt of the blame. Really, ultimately, it comes down to it was just a very, very ugly and poor situation. And when you compound it with the fact that over the last decade, the Giants only had that one playoff appearance when they went to Green Bay, you're looking at an accumulation of frustration, disgust, anger, misery, and that all played a part in it too. And that's one of the reasons why you have a new regime here this year. Although I think if you simply look at the summer roster as it stands this year, it is probably better than any summer roster the Giants have had since that 2016 playoff season, which is one of the reasons why I think the optimism in the building is absolutely justified.
Yeah, and I think especially when you look at that optimism, it all starts, I believe, as an outsider, with the new hire in Brian Daboll. Obviously, they got him from the Buffalo Bills. Obviously, there was some sort of controversy with Brian Flores, but at the end of the day, Brian Daboll is their head coach, and he seems to be having a lot of good energy in the building. Again, we'll talk about Daniel Jones and their plans for him in just a little bit. But Brian Daboll, did you like the hire for your Giants?
Yeah, the Daboll hire made a lot of sense for a number of reasons. Let's go first with the fact that Joe Schoen came down from Buffalo as the assistant GM to take over this team. I mean, the one thing that we all know in the NFL is that when you have continuity between your GM and your head coach, you've given yourself the best chance to succeed. Well, if Schoen was coming from Buffalo, where he was part of a team that retooled itself about 4 or 5 years ago and successfully did it while Daboll was the offensive coordinator. I mean, come on, my man. Any logic that you could put forth on the table said, Shane's going to bring Daboll down here. It makes the most sense. And if they don't bring Daboll down, something doesn't add up. Right. I mean, to me, it was always going to be his job to lose once Schoen was named the general manager. There were too many positives to gain. So to me, I just found, well, I don't want to necessarily go to talking about other people who aren't here because it's not the place to do it. But it made the most sense for Schoen and Daboll to come down as a pair, especially given the success they had as symmetrical personalities in Buffalo. And they're here with an understanding that Daniel Jones has one more shot to prove that he can be the franchise quarterback that they need. And after what Daboll did with Josh Allen and the Bills, another reason why it just made perfect sense why he would have been the lead candidate all along to get this job. Again, I can't say it enough. It seems to me he would have had to screw up the interview badly in order not to get this job.
Yeah, he seemed like the front runner from the very beginning of the entire thing. I was not shocked whatsoever to see that the Giants had hired him. Again, especially you bring the GM, you bring the the offensive coordinator or the assistant GM and the offensive coordinator. It just makes perfect sense. The Giants weren't super active in free agency. Obviously, some players come, some players go, but no super duper huge names. So let's just skip right ahead to the draft. Everyone is going to focus, obviously, on their top two picks in Evan Neal and Kayvon Thibodeau. What did you think of the Giants draft?
Well, the first two picks were superstar picks, and their top 10 picks, first time in franchise history, they had two in the top 10. You can't miss on those, and I don't think anybody thinks that they did.
No.
So that's fine. That's a given. Let's push that to the side. The rest of the draft, They took guys who I believe are very scheme specific for what this Giants staff wants to do. Wandel Robinson is a gadget receiver. All right. People talk all the time. X, Y, and Z are the three receiver spots on the field. Well, I've created a new position in the nomenclature. It's called the G receiver. That is the gadget receiver. The guy who will do everything and anything on the field, no matter how unexpected it is, it's going to be done. He will line up in all different spots, running all kinds of plays. He's a gadget receiver. Some people look at that as a negative. I don't look at that as a negative. Gadget receiver simply describes the fact that he's going to run a lot of unusual plays. That's all it means. Wandel Robinson is that guy. Think of what they did up in Buffalo with Isaiah McKenzie, with Cole Beasley. Think of what they did in Kansas City with Tyreek Hill. Remember, Mike Kafka, the quarterback coach from Kansas City, is here as the Giants offensive coordinator. So think about those kinds of things that were done with those kinds of wide receivers. And Wandel Robinson played a lot of running back when he was at Nebraska the first 2 years of his career before he went to Kentucky. So think of him as an offensive weapon, not as a small smurf receiver. This is a guy who's going to do a variety of things in a variety of different ways. Half the teams in the NFL probably would not have wanted him because they don't have chapters in their book for a G receiver. But if you're an offensive coordinator that has chapters for a gadget receiver and you're going to want to get funky, you're going to want a guy like Wandel Robinson. So that pick made a lot of sense to me based on the Giants hierarchy. We look down the line. They draft a couple of offensive linemen. That made perfect sense because they're still in the middle of retooling this offensive line. They want to make sure they get some young guys in here who can be part of the future. Made perfect sense to me. We look at the fact that they drafted a couple of linebackers. How can you knock that? Giants haven't had really good linebackers for a long time. You know, they're hoping that Ojolari blossoms off a good rookie year. And obviously Blake Martinez coming back from a bad knee injury. But this is a team that hasn't done well drafting linebackers for a long, long time. So they took a couple of those guys who, by the way, will also excel on special teams. And they took a corner in Flott who, you know, he's very long in terms of length, and they desperately needed some help at corner in terms of depth. So they got a guy who's coming out of the SEC, a very, very strong program. And, you know, I'm thinking to myself, this is a very functional draft. You know, it may not be a spectacular draft. They may not have guys beyond the top 3 that make an immediate impact. But I think this is a very functional draft. And these guys will do an awful lot about, in terms of executing the playbook that these coaches want them to execute.
Yeah, and I think a question, that some people would have, especially with that Wandale Robinson pick, because obviously, pre-draft there were a lot of whispers seeming to come out about a potential, trade for Kadarius Toney. Do you still see that as a potential option? Did you ever see that as an option? Now that they brought in Wandale Robinson in the draft, They already have Darius Slayton. Just a flat out no.
No, flat out no. Kadarius Toney. No. See, the reason they drafted Robinson is multifold. In the terms of Toney had injury trouble last year. So his durability at the moment is a bit of a question mark. Okay, that's obvious. So if you're the Giants offensive staff, Kafka and Dable, and you know that a significant portion of your playbook relies on formations and getting the ball to people in different spots and utilizing a gadget receiver and a gadget chapter in your playbook to keep defenses off balance. If that's part of what your foundation is, you need, without a shadow of a doubt, to have a gadget receiver who's going to be on the field every week. Otherwise, you're going to erase a huge chunk of your playbook, and that's going to be a lot of what you're going to try to do this year. That's not of any help to you. So I think the insurance policy against Toney's injury was one reason. I think the other reason is Tony, by no stretch of the imagination, is a running back. Remember, he had quarterback background when he came to the Giants. Robinson has running back background. So he's even more of a gadget receiver than Tony is. The other thing you want to keep in mind here is that Sterling Shepard, coming off a torn Achilles in the last regular season game of last season, is probably not going to be ready for at least the first half of the year. I mean, I think that's logical to assume.
Yeah.
Well, that, again, we're talking about one of the best slot receivers in the conference, if not the league, and you figure he's going to miss the first half of the year, and you don't know about Tony's durability. So by drafting Wandel Robinson, you've now basically, in effect, you've practically guaranteed yourself of having that gadget receiver from day one when you open the regular season against the Tennessee Titans. Again, I think there are a lot of teams in this league who would not have drafted Robinson, period. There are others who might have thought about him later on because maybe the gadget receiver is not as important to them in their playbook, but it's a mixture of a small percentage of plays. For this team, the gadget receiver is going to be huge. That's why you take him. And remember something. Kafka, coming from Kansas City, they got rid of Tyreek Hill. You know the Chiefs would love to replace that gadget receiver. Buffalo is where Shane and Dable came from. Cole Beasley is gone. You know the Bills would love to replace that gadget receiver as well. So I am sure that Dable, Shane, and Kafka all together were saying to themselves, you know, Wandel Robinson's the perfect gadget receiver. If we don't take this guy where we take him, chances are Buffalo and Kansas City are at least two other teams who are going to look at him as a priority, and we may not get him. That's one of the reasons why I can justify the Robinson pick in the third round.
Yeah, I think the Robinson pick was I think it was a little bit shocking to see him go as high as he did, because I believe it was the second round. I believe he was picked 41.
I'm sorry, second round, yes.
Yeah. Second round, I believe he was picked number 41. I think, or maybe not 41, but I think a lot of people were shocked to see him go as high as he did. But
yeah,
I think
he was projected to be a fourth rounder by those who cared, and some thought maybe third. I'm telling you, the Giants probably had good intel based on their past experiences with guys in Buffalo and Kansas City. They probably don't think he was going to be there in round 3. And let's face it, if you looked at this draft, how many real gadget receivers were in this draft? Have you taken a look?
I did not.
There was probably only one. Sky Moore might have been the only other true gadget receiver. I think he could probably be used in that capacity. In terms of first or second day picks, those were the two guys. If you didn't get one of those two guys, you weren't going to get a premier gadget receiver.
Yeah, and obviously Sky Moore landing with Kansas City puts him in a perfect situation. Wandel Robinson seems to be in a perfect situation here in New York as well. One more question I have about the turnover in the offseason was James Bradberry. Obviously, I think there was a lot of head scratching, going on about why the Giants were releasing James Bradberry. Can you enlighten me a little bit?
Well, obviously, they were in significant salary cap hell. I think we all know that.
Right.
And so what they had to do was lop off a player who they really liked, a player who they know is a quality player, but with his number, it just becomes impossible to hold on to him. You have a couple of choices, obviously. You could always try to ask him to take a pay cut. You could always try to redo the deal and see if he's willing to do something like that, but you're going to have to pay that credit card off down the road. And the Giants, in the middle of a retool, especially with this new administration, really did not want to do that. I'm not so sure Bradberry would have taken a deal like that anyway. So what do? They feel as though, okay, you know what? We'll make this move. They have Aaron Robinson, second-year corner, third-round pick out of Central Florida last year, who they really like a lot. And now you're putting it on his plate. He played limited reps last year after a sports hernia injury. They used him mostly in the slot, but there's no question he can play boundary. I believe that. I know they believe that. And he's probably the lead favorite to be the boundary corner opposite Jackson. So we will see how that works out. I know the Giants believe one thing. They believe they've got a much more devastating pass rush from their front seven with Ojulari in his second season, drafting Thibodeau, that's going to enhance their defense as a whole. And it can certainly make life a lot easier on your secondary when you have guys who can terrorize the quarterback. And I believe that they believe in their own heads, especially Ellison Smith, another potential devastating pass rusher who came out of Northern Iowa last year and didn't play much as a rookie. He was hurt, had missed a COVID season in college. They really like his potential as well. They think the pass rush is going to be significantly improved, which obviously helps the secondary out. So they're taking a hit there, but I think they believe that that hit's not going to be as bad as most other people do.
Yeah, and especially when you look at how the NFL has been over the past couple of years with the fact that it seems like every team, in order to have success, needs one of those premier pass rushers. I mean, you saw, inside your own division, you look, Washington has Chase Young. You look, and Dallas has DeMarcus Lawrence, and you look in Philly, and they made some acquisitions in the offseason as well. So for them to be able to, pick up a guy like a Kayvon Thibodeau, and I believe they got him did they get him? I think they got him at 5, and then they got Evan Neal at 7.
Correct.
So being able to add him is going to be able to help out that secondary.
Well, here's the thing you got to remember too, and I know people outside New York won't understand this very much, but it's a significant reason why the Giants believe their defense is going to work out just fine. Patrick Graham, the former defensive coordinator who wound up going to the Raiders, his defense is based off of a foundation of causing confusion with his secondary. Looking like we're playing man, looking like you're playing too deep, looking like you're playing cover 3, or whatever it is, pre-snap look in the secondary, and then actually changing it up as the snap occurs. It's all about confusion in his secondary. That's what he bases his defensive schemes on. Not true with Wink Martindale, who, by the way, another reason you want to talk about why Daboll was the right guy. Look what he did. He stole the quarterback's coach from the Kansas City Chiefs, another offensive powerhouse, and winds up grabbing Wink Martindale, who had just left the Baltimore Ravens. And we all know that over the last half a dozen years, he's regarded as one of the most creative, most devastating, and most lethal defensive coordinators in the league. So think about that for just a second. Look at the 2 coordinators he brought in. I mean, how could you argue with that? Wink Martindale's foundation, his entire defense is based on confusing the offensive line and confusing the quarterback with his complex looks in the front 7. He's all about pass rush, and he's all about front 7 confusion. He'll play straight up in the back. He'll leave his secondary out there and say, "Okay, that's what we're playing. We're not gonna confuse you back there. No pre-snap stuff. The secondary is a secondary. What we're gonna do is confuse your linemen and your quarterbacks with a devastating, painful, and lethal front 7 combination of looks, twists, guys who are up, guys who are down, guys who are moving all over the place, guys who are playing inside, outside, guys who are blitzing from every known location possible." That's what Wink does. So when you consider now, he's got Leonard Williams, he's got Azeez Ojulari, he's got Kayvon Thibodeau. Potentially, if Ellison Smith, proves to be what they thought he was when they drafted him last year, all of a sudden, you're going to have some quarterbacks and some offensive linemen shaking in their boots.
Yeah, for sure. No, I 100% agree with you on that one. Moving on a little bit to more of the the offensive side of the ball. Do you think that the Giants are completely in on Daniel Jones? Obviously, they declined the 5th-year option for Jones during the offseason, so this is going to be the last year of his contract. I believe the franchise tag next year is going to be somewhere in the range of $30 million. Do you think that they are still in on Daniel Jones, or do you think they're still are kind of focusing on him, but looking forward to someone else as well?
No, I think they're in on Daniel Jones with a hedge. They know that they need Daniel Jones in a perfect world to succeed. He needs to have a terrific season for this team to go anywhere this year. But where's the hedge? The hedge is they did sign Tyrod Taylor, who has started games and won games in this league before. Taylor got a multi-year contract that includes a lot of different incentives and triggers so that if the Giants do move on from Daniel Jones, you will look at Tyrod Taylor as the bridge quarterback next year. It's really that simple. And what does Daniel Jones have to do to be the man? He's got to stay healthy, first of all. I mean, I've thrown out the number arbitrarily. I mean, he's been hurt every single season he's been with the Giants. He's not been able to play a full season yet. Now, I don't know. Does he have to play all 17 games? Does that have to be a prerequisite? I don't know. Maybe 15 games is good enough. I don't know. But he's got to prove healthy and durable. That's number one. Number two, he's got to continue to raise his level of play. He's going to have to pull some games out of the fire and show that he can be one of those quarterbacks who can put a team on his back and just will them to victory. That's what your elite quarterbacks are. Your elite quarterbacks in this league will win as many as 3 or 4 games on their own because their team isn't playing well or their defense isn't playing well, and they just step up and they make enough plays at the quarterback position that they pull 3 or 4 games out of the fire during the course of the regular season. That's what makes an elite quarterback. Okay? Eli Manning was one of those guys. Now, can Daniel Jones do that? We still don't know the answer to that yet. But the Giants are hoping, they're optimistic, and they're hopeful that he will. They didn't pick up his option because, after all, if you pick up his option, you're on the hook for that 5th year of the deal next year. What happens if he gets hurt again, which he's done throughout his entire pro career? Now you're on the hook for that money. It's guaranteed. So that's why they didn't pick up the option. More so because of lack of durability than a wilting of their optimism that he can be good. They believe he can be good, but the durability question has yet to be answered. So if he can answer both of those, be durable, and then enhance their belief that he's good, well, then they got 2 options. They can either offer him a multi-year deal, or they can tag him next year and have him play on a 1-year tag for $29 million. That's not so bad when you consider, 12 quarterbacks in this league are making over $30 million a year. So if he's got to play for 29 next year, what's so bad about that?
Exactly. And I think especially, you pointed out the fact that he hasn't had a whole bunch of those games where he's, you said pulled the game out of the fire, where, he is the reason that they won that game. And if they didn't have him, they wouldn't have won that game. And one of the games that comes to mind, although they didn't win, it was that game in, back in 2020, I believe it was week 7. It was at Philadelphia. It was the one where he had that gigantic run that he wound up, tripping and falling. But he also, he should have been sealing that game had Evan Ingram not dropped what was a fantastic pass on, I believe it was 3rd down that he dropped. And, and that was one of those games that Daniel Jones really looked like he was going to, cement his legacy and start his uprise. Obviously, again, as you've said, injuries over the past, every year he's been in the league have started to hamper that. Another player that's kind of had, injuries seemingly every year of his career, except for his first one, was his Giants running back Saquon Barkley. They took him 2nd overall back in, I believe it was 2018. Do you think that there are plans right now for the Giants to extend Saquon Barkley, or do you think that there obviously is some hesitance due to the fact that, over the past, I think he missed, 14 games in 2020. He only missed 4 games last year, and he missed 3 games in 2019. Do you think that there are still plans for the Giants to extend Saquon Barkley?
Oh, I think that's another wait and see. I mean, look, he had over 2,000 yards from scrimmage as a rookie when he led the league with 91 receptions, right?
Right.
And just, I mean, he was dynamic as ever, offensive NFL Rookie of the Year. If Barkley, and then the next year he played on a badly sprained ankle and still ran for 1,000 yards. And then obviously subsequent to that, then he blew out his knee, and we know this past season coming off that knee injury, he wasn't the same. He's had a very good spring so far. Now, if Barkley proves to be anything like what he was as a rookie, well, remember something. If they decide what they're going to do with Jones, whether or not he's gone, or they give him a new multi-year deal. That then leaves the tag available for Barkley. And the tag for a running back is over $9 million. 9.5, I think. Something in that vicinity. That's not a bad price for a premier running back. In fact, that's a really good price. So that's why Jones and Barkley are kind of tied together. Because if you can find a definitive answer as to what you're going to do with Jones, that now gives you the option of using the tag on Barkley. That's an important facet that I don't think a lot of people are taking into account. You know?
Yeah, and I think that all of that is made possible by the Giants declining that that 5th-year option on Daniel Jones. So it puts them both in the they're both in a contract year this year. So obviously, I think the franchise tag will more than likely probably be used on one of the two, because I don't necessarily see them letting Saquon Barkley just walk, straight up walk. But I don't necessarily.
If Barkley isn't anything like what he's supposed to be, they will let him walk.
Okay.
I think they would, and I think that would be smart. If it turns out he is still damaged goods and cannot be an all-star caliber back, I could see them letting him walk. I don't think they would chase very hard after him if he got an offer somewhere else under those conditions.
Okay. All right. That is very interesting to hear. Looking forward, to this next season, who do you think are, a couple of players, name, one or two, who you think are going to be taking that leap, from being just a guy to a star, or a star to a superstar? Who are you expecting to see flash a lot this year?
Well, on defense, I've already mentioned Ellison Smith. I think he is going to come out of nowhere and really surprise some people in this new scheme with his pass rush abilities. Everybody already knows Xavier McKinney had a terrific second year in the NFL last year. I think this year he makes the jump to being an all-star. So those would be two guys on defense that I'll give you. I could mention other guys. We've mentioned Aaron Robinson before. He's going to probably be a starting corner this year. I think he's going to hold down the position just fine. On offense, well, the offensive line's been rebuilt. They need those guys to produce immediately. They've got veterans in there in terms of Glowinski and Feliciano. They added Neal, a number 7 overall pick in the draft. Obviously, he's going to start at right tackle. And Lemieux's coming back off a knee injury to be the left guard. And, you got Andrew Thomas, former number 1 pick, playing left tackle. So that offensive line has to step up, and they've got to do what it is that needs to be done to function as a unit. But other than that, on offense, I think you're probably looking at some, if you're a fantasy person, you're not going to like it, because I don't think any one individual is going to put up superstar numbers other than maybe Jones or Barkley. But you got to feel that Kenny Golladay is going to be more like himself this year. You want to believe that Tony is going to put up some very important games, even if his overall numbers aren't going to be spectacular. He'll make spectacular plays. I think you're going to see a surprising result out of Daniel Bellinger, the tight end that they took out of San Diego State. I think he's going to make a number of very key receptions. He looks like he's a much better pass catcher than he was given credit for in school. And I think he could be an important part of what they do moving forward as the season progresses. I think Darius Slayton, who was a really good rookie a few years back at wide receiver and has gone through 2 really rough years of injury. I think he looks healthy. If he's got his confidence back, I mean, I know people around the league who thought Darius Slayton was absolutely on track to be a first or second wide receiver, a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2 in this league. And the last 2 years, he's looked more like a wide receiver 4 or 5. But if he truly is healthy and has his confidence back, I think Darius Slayton could be a very important part to this offense too. But again, I don't think anybody outside of Jones or Barkley is going to put up fantasy football numbers, if your listeners care about that. I personally don't. I detest fantasy football, but I know a lot of people only care about that, and that's how they grade players. So if you're looking for those kinds of numbers, the Giants are not a team you're going to want to go to.
Yeah, and I think, you look back, as you were talking about Darius Slayton, you look back at his rookie season. Yeah, he only had 48 receptions, but he still put up 740 yards, averaged almost over 15 yards a catch. and even had 8 touchdowns to put up. Those are good fantasy numbers. I'm not a big fantasy guy as well. I might be if I was good at it, but I'm not. So,
well, more importantly, during that season, I'd have to go back and double check it. I believe Slayton was second among NFL wide receivers who qualified in terms of first down percentage on receptions. He was a very integral part of that offense. And, first down percentage is a very big deal because that moves the sticks. I get it. Everybody wants touchdowns, especially fantasy football people. They want touchdowns. They want yards. Coaches want first downs. Okay? That's what coaches want. They want to be able to control the ball, move the ball, and generate offense. I'd rather have a guy who has a 95% first down conversion rate and maybe scores a few less touchdowns because he's going to help me move the ball up and down the field. I got other guys if they want who can score. I need guys who are going to be able to get that first down when I need it.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. And I think, again, with this offense, hopefully if Kenny Golladay is playing better than he has, or playing better than he did last year and is getting back to how he was those last couple seasons in Detroit, I think that their offense could be something really good to watch. A very similar question, but who are some players that you potentially think could be on that hot seat? Obviously, we've talked about Daniel Jones. You talked about if Saquon Barkley's not able to stay healthy, or if he's not producing, that they could potentially just let him walk. Who are some other guys like that who you think that if they don't perform, they may not be on this team next year?
Well, outside of those two guys, you'd have to put Slayton in that category. He needs to bounce back and show that he's legitimate. I mean, if not, he had a 4-year deal, right? So this is year 4. So he's in a contract year 2. That's pretty important for him. I think other than that, you probably you want to look at the larger priced contracts, right? Because those are the guys who are always on the chopping block come salary cap time. So Leonard Williams, he's played really well for the Giants. 2 years ago, he had 11 and a half sacks. Last year, I think he was in on a career high 81 tackles. Think about that. As a defensive end who plays half his snaps or more at defensive tackle, and he was in on 81 tackles.
Wow.
I don't think people understand how good he really is.
Yeah.
But this is a guy who, unfortunately, his cap number is very large. He's amongst the top 3 on the team. So, he's going to have to continue to give them outstanding production. Otherwise, his cap number could make him a very dangerous target. Again, I happen to be a big Leonard Williams guy, and I hope he continues to produce because I like to see him around. But, his number puts a lot of pressure on him. His cap number puts a lot of pressure on him to continue to produce at a very high level. Otherwise, they could be looking at him very carefully. I think those are the types of guys that you're talking about.
Yeah, again, it's always going to be the high contract guys and the guys who are, commanding a lot of money, who are going to kind of be first on that chopping block. We've gotten, close to the end here. The last thing I'm going to ask you, what do you have, the Giants record being? What do you have them going? They don't have a super tough schedule this year. Obviously, they play my NFC North and my Packers division. Obviously, you're playing your own division in the NFC East. And then you guys play the NFC or the AFC South. So it's not a super tough thing. You play my Packers in London. That's, not going to be the most fun game to wake up and watch for, especially for you. I'm over here on the West Coast. So for me, it's at 6:30 a.m. For you, that's going to be 3:30 in the morning. But what do you have the New York Giants going this year?
I think it's realistic to expect, if the optimism is accurate, and Jones is just good, and Barkley is good, I don't think it's a reach to think that they're an 8 or 9 win team. Okay? Which is why I think your power ranking's a little low. Because I think, the teams down in that vicinity are probably 4-win teams. I do think the Giants, realistically, based on this summer roster today, if the optimism is as real as I think it is, I think they're an 8 or 9 win team. But I always tell people that pending some catastrophic injury or something that totally goes haywire, you look at a roster over the summer, and you have to basically add 2 or subtract 2 victories from your projection just based on how the ball's going to bounce, how the officials call games, and fluky plays that always happen in the NFL. Tip balls that cost you a game or whatever the case may be. So realistically, I think it's about a 500 team, 8 or 9 wins, 8, 9, 9 and 8. That's you don't have a 500 team anymore in the NFL because we're playing 17. But that's what I think this team is realistically, with the opportunity to potentially win +2 or the opportunity to go -2. So let's call them an 8 or 9 win team that could win as many as 10, maybe 11 if everything goes absolutely right. Or at the same time, if things don't go right, we're looking at probably a 6-win team.
Yeah, and I think especially I think the NFL, out of all of the 4 major sports in America, it really is the one where every year, pending, every team could be picking number 1 overall if there's some catastrophic injury. Because you look, regardless of the team, my Packers have certainly been or felt like they've been close when Aaron Rodgers hasn't been in the lineup. So it all really depends if everything stays, if everyone stays healthy and everyone is playing up to their potential. You think that they could get to 11 wins? Yeah, I do have
I think that's a reach. Let me make it clear. I think that's
Okay.
a reach. That's if
Yeah.
every domino
Everything.
falls exactly correctly.
Correct.
I think 10 wins. 10 wins is probably more or less the max for them if every domino falls correctly. But I think 8 or 9 is realistic. I really do.
Yeah, and I think especially, you go and you look at that, at that schedule, specifically. It's not like they're not exactly playing a whole lot of world beaters. You have, the Tennessee Titans, who, their quarterback situation is not exactly one I'd want to be in with, the amount that they're paying Ryan Tannehill. You get to play Carolina. Obviously, you play Dallas twice. You play Chicago. You can almost mark that one down as a win. Jacksonville and Chicago back to back. I mean, you guys have a stretch of games here. What is it? It's, I think, 4 straight games against teams that I have ranked below them. Obviously, again, Jacksonville, Seattle, you have your bye week in week 9. Then you go Houston, Detroit, then at Dallas again. I think that you guys have a very favorable stretch of games. They're right in the middle of the season. And even, down the stretch of the season, I think Indianapolis could potentially be a team that might take a step back because I don't know necessarily what Matt Ryan has left in the tank. Minnesota is always kind of you never really know. But I think that, they potentially could go on a run there with, I think they're out of their last 6 games, they have 4 of them are within division, or 5 of their last 7 are all in division games, and those can obviously go, whichever way.
Yeah, the NFC East is crazy. The rivalries in most divisions, kind of overshadow whatever you think about the rosters because the rivalries just cause all kinds of turmoil. And I think if the Giants, as you said, they've got some weak teams there between the kind of first third and second third of their schedules. If and they have to get off to a good start. Let me make something very clear to you. They do need to come out of the first 4 games 2-2. No worse. Tennessee, Carolina, Dallas, Chicago. They've got to be going into that London game against Green Bay no worse than 2-2 because this fan base, this media base, the frustration of everything that's happened to this team, all that optimism about this new administration and what the Giants are trying to do, they need an injection of adrenaline. They need an injection of hope. They can't have this team going 0-4 or 1-3 to start the season because that's going to let a lot of emotional and mental air out of the balloon right from the get-go. And it will start to snowball. And it's going to be even harder for them to get off the mat. But if they can get out of those first 4 games at 2-2, go into London, well, even if they lose to Green Bay, and we have no idea, what's going to happen in that game, but let's just say Green Bay should be favored for sure, right? So
Right.
They lose to Green Bay, but then they face Baltimore and Jacksonville and Seattle. They could easily come back and win 2 out of those 3. And all of a sudden, they're back to 500 again going into the bye. So, the schedule makers, I'll be honest, from a logistical perspective, I thought this was the most favorable schedule the Giants have had in more than a decade when I
Wow.
looked at it. Honestly, I think it's really set up for them to do some serious business.
Yeah, again, now that, the more I look at it, the more it seems, incredibly favorable. Again, you have the bye week. Then you go off and you're playing Houston, who was picking 3rd overall this year. You're getting Detroit, who was picking 2nd overall this year. Dallas, they always, you were talking about how crazy the NFC East is. My dad's a Cowboys fan. That's how I got the name Emmitt. But, I've watched as many NFC East games as, I think as humanly possible in my 20 years of life. And you never know which way it's going to go. So, again, you look at them going into that and, all of a sudden, again, as I said, once they get past Houston and Detroit, 5 of their next 7 games are all division games. So, you could come out of that, out of those 5 division games, you can come out 5-0. You could also, come out 0-5. Obviously, it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. But if you can come out of that 3-2, or even possibly 4-1, I think you're set up perfectly to, try to make a push towards the end of the play or into the playoffs.
I'll put it to you this way: if they lose, let's say they lose to Tennessee, Dallas, Green Bay, and Baltimore. I'll give you those 4 losses. It's entirely possible they're 6-4 after 10 games, and then going to Dallas, making a stretch run for the final third of the season. They could very easily be 6-4, right there.
Yeah. And that's not even necessarily crazy to say, because again, you look Seattle, we have no idea what's going on at quarterback. Jacksonville, they've just picked number 1 overall 2 seasons in a row. It is very, very possible that they're looking at, at that last stretch of games and, aiming towards a playoff push.
See, so maybe my 8 or 9 doesn't sound so nuts anymore, does it?
It does not. It does not sound super nuts. I didn't think it sounded nuts, but it is looking at their schedule. That is incredibly favorable. Incredibly favorable. Paul, I've had a fantastic time having you on today. I cannot thank you enough.
No problem. Very glad to be with you. Enjoyed it. Good luck with your show.
Hey, thank you very much, Paul.
Be well.
All right. Have a good one. And once again, thank you to Paul Dottino. He's a W fan in New York. I had a fantastic time. Again, I'm hoping to get Dallas back on here soon. We're going to have, a Talking Nerves coming up and, within the next couple of days. We're in the middle of the, series, or I guess the series starts today against the Minnesota Twins. But I had a fantastic time talking to Paul, and we are going to see you guys next time.